Welcome to our podcast, Our Story to Tell, where we share the behind the scenes of moving our family abroad and how that move changed everything for us.
We're Risa and Tanner, an American family living life abroad with our two little adventures. From the US to Germany, Japan, and now Italy, this podcast is more than just travel. It's a story of transformation too.
Everyone has a story, and this is our story. And maybe some parts of it will sound a little bit like yours too.
So let's get started.
Today's episode is one we've been thinking about doing for some time. We were born and raised in the US. We've moved to Germany, Japan, and Italy. We've seen a lot of differences between those places, and we wanted to talk about how they've shaped us, affected us, and like things that we've seen, because some are very drastic and some are similar, but just viewed from different lenses. So that's what we really wanted to dive in today, because it's something that affects everyone, both men and women, and especially given like our culture and background, we've noticed how much we've changed and also been able to have our eyes opened to different things.
Yeah, even in Utah, this is something that we talked about and noticed from a fairly young age, I would say, because I was a dietetic student. I was also a personal trainer. My world included a lot of, at least the effects of beauty culture. I worked with a lot of individuals with eating disorders, disordered exercise patterns. So there was a lot there that I was unpacking and would talk to you about. Fast forward to now, and I feel like we became even more passionate about this topic. And I feel like this is just a meaningful episode. I do think this is going to resonate with a lot of women, a lot of mothers. However, I'm excited to have you here, Tanner, and share your thoughts. I say have you here as you're my guest. I feel like it's going to be awesome to have a male's perspective in this conversation, as typically I feel like it's more focused on females.
Yeah, I think that the perspective is different for me than it has been for you, and it always will, because the pressure is different and less in most cases for men than women. And today's episode is by far not going to be one where we say that those who spend a lot of time on looking the part or getting ready or love that type of self-care with getting ready, whether it be Botox or hair extension or dyeing hair or whatever it is, it's not to say that those are inherently bad things. It's just for us to kind of dissect the patterns that we've seen and how we feel, like you said, how we've changed and how we've had a deeper connection and meaning towards this topic.
Yes, we absolutely want to be clear on that and want to say carefully that this is not to shame anyone at all, not even to shame skincare, Botox, injections, all of those things also that you had mentioned. It's rather to recognize how beauty culture shapes the way that we think and the way that we view ourselves. So we want you to think about the systems that we live in, the different cultures that we live in, and the messages that we are receiving as being a part of that culture, as being a part of the system of the world in general. For us, we've now lived in Utah, Germany, Japan, and Italy, and each place carries its own messaging about aging, about beauty standards, even about worth. And we've seen how drastically the beauty standards can change throughout all of those countries.
Yeah, primarily in Utah, it seemed like it was kind of photo finish, nail finished perfectionism in a lot of ways. Germany was a little bit more of a naturalist put togetherness beauty, and then Japan had a hyper focus on skincare, but a little more subtle. Mm-hmm. And then here in Italy, it seems like it's a little more thoughtful and intentional, but not too over the top.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we're going to be breaking down each country more in depth. And we also want to preface and say here that a lot of what we're saying is just our lived experience and our personal perspective on it. They are going to be more general, broad observations. Of course, there are outliers. Of course, there are people that are going against the grain. There are women and men who are pushing against these beauty standards. But in general, we want to talk about it because, again, every place you go, every place you live in, there is an unspoken expectation or beauty standard.
Yeah, it affects everyone.
So Utah feels intense, and I feel like the more distance we've had, the more intense Utah feels to me, probably because we've lived abroad now for over 5 years. And I also think beauty standards have changed a lot since then too. Mm-hmm. But from our perspective, living in Italy, where we grew up, and especially in the Salt Lake area, it seems to be pretty intense. And there's kind of an ideal aesthetic.
Well, and I don't even think it's limited to Salt Lake. Of course, you have like the very trendy shows like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, where each of these participants and contestants tend to be on these shows because of like their fame. And typically when that comes with it, they're in all of these beauty standards. They're getting like boob jobs, they're getting like lip injections and Botox like regularly. They have a different hair color or hairstyle or hair extensions, like seems like every new season or something that comes up. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of, I think, desire to be like at the top.
This is Hollywood, right? So I feel like that very much makes sense. Like they're on national TV. But in general, if you do look at, let's say, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, I would say a lot of how they look is very comparable, and I would say a decent example of what some of that like ideal beauty culture is. And
Sure.
it's high.
Maybe a little exaggerated in some areas. Like I don't think that that's for everyone, but it's not that uncommon to see many of like the activities and like the beauty procedures that are done for, what I would consider like everyday moms and women. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And already I'm like, oh, I do not want this to feel like an attack on any person at all as we say this. But in general, I would say the Utah aesthetic consists of dyed hair, like you said, big lashes, or maybe more natural lashes nowadays. I don't know, because I think the beauty culture has kind of changed on that one. It used to be big lashes, kind of the perfect brows. Spray tans is a big one. Nails being done and manicured like professionally. Hair extensions, very, very common. Botox and injections, that's being more normalized. And then even beyond that, plastic surgery is being more openly discussed and more common.
Well, it's not very surprising that the plastic surgery for Utah, I believe that they are top 3 of like the population base, like per capita. Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County has like the most plastic surgeons per population compared to like bigger than like cities in Miami and California.
One of the top for sure.
One of the top. And it's like, it's kind of crazy to think about that because then the demand is there, and then the more specialized surgeons and the higher, better surgeons are going to go to those areas, which then just kind of feeds the ability for people to get what they want, right? So kind of interesting.
We've also seen a major influx of med spas in Utah. I'm sure that's common throughout all the states. We just grew up in Utah, so we recognize that. To even give more context for some common things you find in Utah, Utah has one of the highest gym rates I actually saw in research while finding this. There's a really high population of MLM companies.
Multi-level marketing.
Yep. Yes, and a lot of them are geared towards makeup, skincare, things that would relate to this topic. You're like Mary Kay. This is Mary Kay I just mentioned because it's even where we grew up in a small town was like on trend when we were going through school. It's very common. It's also historically ranked quite high in antidepressant medication usage in women. It also has one of the highest eating disorder treatment access. And I saw that firsthand as I personally have had experience working, I should better say, like shadowing a dietitian when I was going through my program. Yeah, Utah has some amazing dietitians who are in that space and doctors and therapists. There's a big need for it, as there is a big need for it across the United States and beyond. I'm sure even into the world, like it's a big issue and it extends beyond just beauty culture. Of course, like that needs to be said, but we can't say it also doesn't strongly influence it.
Right. Definitely correlation. Doesn't mean causation, but there tends to be a correlation between the two activities. And just in general, like for those who have never looked into, I guess, like modern day society in Utah and like cultures, there's a really close community in most areas. People are really close to people within like the church and like their communities. Groupies, if you want to like name that, are really big there. And so there's also like the internalized pressure that if someone in like your friend group or your church group or your group is like actively participating in these like activities, they're getting their nails done or whatever, all of these events can like also become social events. And so there's like that added pressure that comes along with it, which may lead and probably does lead to like an increased focus on appearance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Obviously, you're going to be influenced by those you're around. And in those settings, you're seeing a lot of even like young moms, which is also a factor influencing like beauty culture and like the high standard it has. You get these young women, young 20-year-olds who are having babies just like I did. I thought I was kind of old compared to some of my friends at 23. You kind of have a culture where there's a quick bounce back to your pre-baby body. And I feel like you just see that more in general in Utah because you see more babies being born,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. There's definitely a higher focus on trying to get back to where you were, which in one side is very empowering for the woman to be able to feel like they are strong, right? And strength can be looked at in many different ways, right? Not just getting back to the same physical strength that you were in before, but also like embracing the changes. And so some people, they fully embrace that. But there is, of course, like you said, kind of the added pressure to kind of bounce back.
Yeah, for sure. I think in Utah, there's kind of a culture of maybe the need to be put together at all times. And we even see that at the gym, maybe even especially at the gym. Like we mentioned, there's a high participation rate for the gyms, which is awesome. Like there's a lot of healthy individuals that care about moving their body. They care about taking care of their bodies. But because the culture is closely tied to like aesthetics, it becomes kind of intense at times to even go to the gym because you'll see around you other individuals who look like they stepped out of a fitness magazine, like perfectly full face makeup, like hair done to perfection in matching sets. That's intimidating when you're just like waking out of bed trying to go get your workout on before the day starts.
Yeah, I think this is most apparent like in college. We haven't been to like a US gym, or at least I didn't go much because I took advantage of the gym on base when I was working at the Air Force in the States. You just feel maybe a little bit of intimidation inside. Maybe not so much for me because like most of the guys were just like me. They just threw on their clothes and whatever. But especially for like the women's side of things, you hit it right on the head. Like walking out of like a modeling shoot, if they were wearing different clothes, you would expect that they were going like on a fancy date. Ready. Even if like they're married or even if they're steady dating somebody, like the expectation, because other women are doing it, is to look very put together.
And I have so many thoughts going on in my head right now, but I feel like it's important to keep in mind, again, there are exceptions, of course. So if you're listening, and especially if you are living in Utah, you might look around and be like, that's not the case for everyone. True. There are exceptions for sure. And then for two, we don't blame the women who are doing this. We don't blame the men who are meeting these standards, these expectations. These people we're talking about are our friends, potentially our family. I don't blame those people. Even for me, when I lived in Utah, I was in that world for sure more than I am now. And I don't think anyone's to blame other than the system that is ever changing and always, in a sense, out of reach or feels out of reach. Even for those who look the part, internally, they feel like there's something potentially lacking.
I think you said it very well. The system or like the expectation to live up to that standard is, created by our society, right? Whether we like to admit it or not, there is an expectation to be held. And of course, like physical appearance is one part of attraction for, each other. And like, we would not want people to like just stop trying. So yeah, maybe that's a good point for us to jump back a little bit here. We dated in high school and then I left on my mission. And then when I got back from my mission, it was one of those moments where I even saw kind of like the impact difference for you because your hair color when I left was as it is now, as natural as your hair color had been, and I had known you, but I came back and you were blonde. Of course, I had seen like pictures of you during the mission and stuff like that, but like being in person and seeing you for the first time, that was like a big transition, like a big shock for me, honestly. I remember you asking me like, so like, what do you think of my hair? Like, do you like it or whatever? And I remember I said, yeah, you look different. Of course, I was like happy at the time to see you, and that mattered more than what I really thought about your hair at the time.
What did you really think about my hair, Tanner?
Well, again, I don't know if I had even cared as much about the hair color as much as like being with you and being home.
Right answer.
I do think that it was took a little bit getting used to. Of
Really?
course.
Yeah.
Of course, naturally.
I mean,
because-
we've talked a little bit about that, so I
Yeah.
know that it was, but also it's fun to talk about because we haven't had this conversation probably more than once.
In addition, on top of it, I remember you telling me, like, I want to tell Tanner that I have actually hair extensions too, and I had no idea.
Well, basically, we'd been starting to spend more time together, and at this point, we'd already started kissing since you got back from your mission.
Don't blush too much there.
No. Anyways, I remember being nervous that you were going to touch my
Feel
head
your extensions.
and feel my hair extensions.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an insecurity, right? Because I wish my hair was just long. And it's funny now because I have like the long hair that I always wanted. But when I was a freshman in high school, I chopped a lot of my hair off to donate because my best friend's mom had passed away from cancer. And so anyways, come to find out, my hair does not grow fast. I feel like when I graduated high school, that was in the year of 2014. I feel like a lot changed because of social media around that time.
Yeah.
So I didn't even feel a lot of the effects of per se beauty culture other than just what I was seeing with my other friends in high school. But in college, I started to use Instagram more, and you started to see how other people were doing their hair. And all of a sudden, you reflect back, and I feel like that's where, for me, I started to really be affected by beauty culture. Of course, there was fashion trends and there was other beauty standards in high school, but it wasn't as extreme. And I would say it wasn't as perfected.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I left just my natural self, and then you came home and I dyed my hair, which again, nothing wrong with that. Like I'm not anti-dyeing your hair, and I know you're not either.
No.
It's just kind of interesting personally to reflect back and see when those changes started to happen and maybe why they started to happen. And I do think that's one of the main messages of this podcast and why we even wanted to talk about it, is just to encourage individuals listening to think about why. Why are we, because we're included, why are we participating in some of the per se quote unquote beauty culture things that we do? Is it because patriarchy is involved? I totally think that has an influence. Is it because we genuinely want to, and we've always been interested in art and makeup and creativity and, being able to change someone's face? Like that is art. Have you always loved fashion? Or are some of the reasons why we're doing certain things because we feel like we have to live up to a standard?
Yeah. It's a complex topic. Mm-hmm. You touched on a lot of big items that you could like dive in and spend entire episodes on, like diving into each of those aspects. But I think what we've come to realize is that it's a little bit of all of those aspects. And over time, it's self-inflicted, it's inflicted from workspace, it's inflicted from social centers and circles as well. But yeah, overall, like the question needs to be asked for people is like, why do we ultimately choose it? Right. And most of it, I think, feels like it's because society demands it. A woman entering the professional field will feel more pressure, in my opinion. This is just like kind of my opinion. They'll feel more social pressure to like be at a certain level of appearance more than like a man. And I say that because I don't necessarily go clean shaven to work every day. I can be a little like more scruffy, but like if a woman went to work with like her hair a little like less put together, or maybe like not having makeup and they normally did or whatever, some of those things kind of go noticed a little bit more, I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, I think there are higher pressures and expectations on women as a whole and in general than the male counterpart, for sure.
For sure. I feel like we've mostly been touching on like the beauty standard for women. Mm-hmm. And that's typically because it's what's associated with like how much money is spent on advertising and commercials for, whether it's from shampoo commercials to makeup to clothing, like a lot of money is spent on marketing and promoting towards women because, society probably agrees that women take more time, they spend more money, they do X, Y, and Z more for their appearance than men do. Like men are, simple creatures for a lack of a better term, where they're okay with fewer options and a little bit less maintenance. Of course, there are extremes on both sides, less for women and more for men, vice versa. But as a whole, we've been talking about the women's side of things. So I guess my perspective for what I felt for beauty culture growing up as an adolescent was that my appearance, more than maybe like beauty, was more defined off of like physical ability. For me, that resonated largely because I was a 3-sport athlete in high school. Like we had a small enough school that we could do that. But also, like, I loved sports. I loved being athletic. I was very fortunate to be naturally coordinated and to like succeed quite well at like all of the things that I did. And so that honestly led into like a little bit of an obsession of being fit, working hard or like exercising hard, kind of like filled, I think, a little bit of that gap for me.
So do you feel like it was just on your physical fitness ability, or do you feel like also the aesthetics of maybe the male physique or high school, right? Teenager male physique?
For sure. Like there were more times where classmates or teammates would be getting teased because they were more overweight and had more fat than other people did, right? And so naturally, like, well, you don't want to be the person that's getting made fun of. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the reality of some of those systems. Even towards like body hair, like growing up too, that was some people who were like, oh my gosh, like you need to shave and you need to like trim your hair and like any part of your body, right? And it's like, I'm a guy with lots of hair, and like that was the same way through like high school too. So the expectation for some people was like, no, things that are natural and should be considered acceptable were kind of frowned upon. People would get teased about or whatever, different body shapes and stuff. So yeah, for men, it wasn't necessarily that we weren't wearing makeup. It's not about getting like your fingernails done or whatever, but it was like, do you have like strong muscles? Are you, ripped, or are you fitting this certain physique? Because that's how you meet, I guess, that's the male equivalent of having really nice hair, nice clothes, nice style, great makeup, great brows, great nails for girls our age. In general, for me as a male growing up, it was a different playing field, but nonetheless, still the kind of the expectation to be a strong person, to not be weak, to be strong.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think it's, again, nice to have both perspectives here, and hopefully those listening are able to enjoy your perspective as well. I also think it's very relatable, especially in Utah, because the fitness culture and beauty culture overlap so heavily. So much so that it's kind of hard to determine, well, what was just the fitness and what was the influence from the culture, I saw this all the time in college as a dietetic student. I had a lot of interactions with individuals who felt like they had to shrink their body to fit the mold, So some of that could be a love for fitness that it started off with, but then became an unhealthy relationship with their body, and it became more. Or some have a very unhealthy relationship with their food and were deeply anxious individuals struggling to find peace with food, peace with exercise, and peace with themselves. I think when I had these experiences fairly early on in my degree, in my job, I just found my purpose and my reason why. Just as a little context and background, this is what I specialize in, working with individuals to heal their relationship with food and with their body. And I just think it's an ongoing journey for everyone in life, myself included.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking briefly about a book called Beauty Sick by Renee Engeln. Risa had actually posted an Instagram post about this several years ago. Just wanted to share kind of our thoughts at the time. She wrote, last week on a walk with Tanner, we were talking about how we wanted to raise our daughter, Willa Jean. We were talking about complex issues and topics that have been on my mind a lot lately. We know that the way we raise Willa will have a huge influence on how she feels about herself and these topics. One thing particular that we know we want to do as best as we can is to raise her to have self-love and acceptance. We want her to know that she is far more than her body, size, shape, and looks, and that she can accomplish anything she puts her mind to. In order to do this, we know that we need to be an example. We need to be kind and confident in ourselves and to others, and do everything we can to fight against the cultural obsession of appearance. You actually break up into 3 different categories, and actually included a 4th category of some topics about the book.
Yeah, I basically wrote a little novel on the Instagram post. Actually was the spark notes of a blog post that I had wrote and included on my website where I did my private practice. So this is where it came from. So before we read those comments, because those are kind of like the what can you do to overcome beauty sick, we're going to talk about even what Renee, the author, says beauty sick is. She lists a couple examples. I'm going to also just read those. One of the examples is not leaving your house or going to a particular activity because you aren't wearing makeup and you think you don't look good enough.
The next one was looking in a full-length mirror and feeling shame about your body or body parts.
The use of plastic surgery or injections and slowing the signs of aging or beauty enhancement.
The next one basically talking about what happens when like men and women spend so much time worrying about weight loss goals, the state of their body, their looks.
And then she says that you are in beauty sickness when you can't focus on other things and you become an observer of yourself and spend all your time worrying about what other people think of you. Some of these things are fairly direct, but we want to stress again that she's not pointing out these things to say like, you're the insecure one and look what you're doing, but rather you live in a system that makes insecurities pervasive. And it's not you, it's the system. So we keep stressing this, but we do really want to handle this with care because this is a sensitive topic. Even food can be a sensitive topic. Beauty culture is a sensitive topic. Like these things are sensitive because they are so complex and everyone's viewing them from different lenses and everyone has different boundaries and different approaches to them. And we respect that. And we started this podcast to be able to talk about our feelings and the things we've learned. So maybe it will resonate, maybe it won't.
As we've grown up and as we've experienced different perspectives, one perspective that does suck to realize is that it's like an ever-changing, ever-moving goalpost. It's like an unachievable goal to reach what society says is like how you should be. Because by the time you reach that one, the goalpost moves and like there's a new trend, there's a new fad, there's a new not that we're going to touch on diet culture or anything. There's a new diet or whatever, something that changes, right? And it changes with popularity. It changes with what new TikTok trend is going on nowadays. Social media exceedingly increases the speed of like the change as well. So we just have to recognize that the perspective is always going to be changing. And part of that perspective is really just recognizing that like there is no winner in the situation. I guess the winner would be to recognize that you don't have to keep up with that, right?
Yeah, that's a good perspective because for me, it is kind of a light bulb thing to realize like it's a constant rat race. Just like you mentioned the online trends, but then even like for me, fashion trends is like one that's like a little intimidating to me. Like I feel like I can never keep up. I'm entering 30s now. I'm so old. Like I feel like I'm behind the trends. There's so many businesses and corporations that are profiting so much money from us trying to chase the next best thing. Like it makes sense. It is set up this way for us to continuously keep buying products to chase the next ideal.
Yeah.
What a great system. Okay, so going back to that Instagram post and my 3 little like tips that I shared, why don't you just read those?
Okay, number 1 was acknowledge that beauty will always matter to the human mind, and that's okay, but it shouldn't matter as much as it does today. Like we don't have to turn off the want for beauty, but we can definitely turn it down. Number 2 says, realize that there are parts of ourselves that we will like more than others, and that's okay. Like you don't have to love every single part of yourself, but rather just realize that that's who you are and find ways to come to accept it. Number 3 is reconnect with your body's breathtaking range of abilities, focusing on what your body helps you to do, what your arms can hold, what your legs allow you to do, how your body expresses your deepest emotion, what it facilitates its internal systems, and when your body feels strongest. Focus on what your body can do, and you will be motivated to take care of it, like no matter how it looks. I think that one resonates with me probably the most because you can focus on the functionality, the practicality of like what your body can do for you. And in general, you're going to try and do things not for the outcome of how it looks necessarily, but because of how it like can help you perform everyday things and hopefully for your like entire life.
And then actually, as I was kind of getting some ideas for this podcast, I went and found my old blog post. It's not accessible to the public, so you couldn't find it even if you were trying. But one of the things on that was to put beauty in its place behind all of the other things that matter more to you. So this list is going to vary on what your priorities are, but this is, as we said, one of those things that hopefully you can practice and try today. And if this resonates, maybe you could make a list of the things that you value in your life. And I do think beauty might be one of those things that you value, and that's totally okay. Just where do you value it? Where does it fit in your list of the other things you value? And if it fits in the middle, then maybe you could examine how much time and energy and thought, especially thought, you're putting into beauty in your life. Is it comparable to where it stands on your list of other things, or do you think it's taking more or less time?
So yeah, as you can tell, there's a lot of passion and interest. And I know that you had a couple of stories that you wanted to share. So why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, the first story is one that was recent, and I was on social media. I was on Instagram, and I follow an American singer in her mid-20s. And before she was singing, she was like sharing a little story, as a lot of artists will do when you go to a concert. She was talking about an instance where she was crying on her parents' bed because she wanted a nose job. And eventually her father sent her an email the next morning and said, like, we will find you a doctor if you can find one that is better than Jesus. And so obviously there's like a Christian family that we're talking about here with Christian values. But I think that story is really beautiful in the sense that's like, if you believe you were created perfectly by someone who made you with intention and with purpose, it just sparks the thought of, why are you trying to change that, And I do love the message of just feeling like we're enough as we are, as we were made, whether you believe it's by God or Jesus or a divine creation, or if you believe it's a human creation by your parents. And honestly, just hearing that story, my main takeaway, because of my perspective, was like, wow, people are crying in high school about wanting nose jobs. I think it just like hit me of how high the pressure is. That's a lot to hear. And I think it hit closer to home because we have 2 girls.
Yeah, it definitely affects us a little bit more with having that type of pressure. And if it's being passed along on social media, which is a whole another topic and episode that we could talk about, is like social media influence and what that looks like for kids growing up, especially now, which is different than what we were growing up with. Yeah, like what pressure is going to be there for them, whether or not they felt that it was an issue before, but it's then being brought out by what they see online. It's heavy. And in some ways, we want to respect what people want to do with their bodies and like how they want to express themselves. Like you said, there's a lot of beauty and art and expressiveness that can come along with it. And then there's also like one of the bullets just to say, we may not love every single part because we might be comparing it to somebody else and what they have. But like when you ultimately sit down and you look at the function, you look at the ability, the capabilities of your body, then a lot of those other things fall into place, and then you understand it like helps you be uniquely you, right? And it gets very complex here, and I know that there's probably great exceptions to the policy that people can understand and say that they have greater self-confidence after they do something, or they have better functionality because of that. And that's not what we're going to go into, like all those details, but it's a complex thing and greatly affects us.
I mean, just to think about a world where girls are crying as a teenager because they want a nose job, like that breaks my heart, because that means that the pressures for like this standard are so strong that, in my ideal world, our girls are just untouched by it. And I know that's unrealistic, but it's what every parent wishes for their kids. And then the other one also was when I was on social media, I came across a Utah influencer who I hadn't followed for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. I almost did not recognize her. There was some reverse aging going on. It just hit me so hard of how much things have changed that I'm seeing individuals now in their 40s, 50s who don't seem to have any wrinkles, who have reversed aging, like I said. And not only that, but body changes have been made. And ultimately with this, I was just so surprised to see the changes. And I find it so interesting because one of the things, the last thing I'm going to really talk about with the book called Beauty Sick, which also, by the way, is written by a PhD psychologist professor. So she specializes her research on this topic. And I highly recommend the book. But one thing she says is that women who are preoccupied with their appearance have fewer cognitive resources available for other pursuits. And I think that's just something to acknowledge, is that when women are spending so much of their time and resources fixated on their appearance, they're naturally spending less on something else, because we all have 24 hours in the day. And when you say yes to something, you say no to something else.
Yeah, especially if these women are moms. They don't have the same 24 hours. They all have 24 hours, but their 24 hours are maybe a lot less because they're taking care of kids. So like when they do have time to do stuff for themselves or whatever, it's focused on that, then it's even less time to focus on those other things.
Yeah, it's just, I think, a little unfortunate to be a female and recognize how these pressures are, in a sense, taking away really valuable time and headspace when like women are amazing forces for change, and they still are regardless, but like to carry the weight of both pressures, like, yeah, that's heavy.
All right, so that was kind of a lot that we covered there, but we want to transition now into how our time abroad between Germany, Japan, and Italy has compared to like our time in the US, what things we've experienced and like what ones are different. First and foremost, we would say like the initial beauty appearance in Germany was more mellow, right? Like a lower, still put together, but Germans were less expressive with like their makeup and like the beauty culture, I would say as a whole, especially where we were. Not to say that it doesn't get bigger in like the bigger cities, but Germans are a little more conservative as far as like the physical appearance goes compared to Utah.
And I'm not sure if like being conservative is even like the reason behind it necessarily. I feel like maybe some of those vibes is what I feel more in Japan in terms of wanting to fit in and like not stand out. But I feel like in Germany, it's more so that like the natural beauty look is more of that ideal accepted standard.
I mean, I think that I can agree with that in some ways, but I also think fitting in is what a lot of Germans do, because Germans are rule followers, Germans are tradition followers, right? And so I think for me, saying it was conservative was maybe being like, there's maybe not as many bold and standing out appearances. They're still well put together. They still take care of themselves. They're still organized, well-rounded, responsible, and those types of things, right? So I think it can be interpreted both ways, but I'd be interested to hear from those who live in Germany, who are German, who have experienced German culture, like what your thoughts are on this. Where does Germany fit on, I guess, like the beauty culture stage if you were to compare it on an international timeline? That'd be interested to see.
Yeah, because our observations is that Germany is more of like a natural beauty look, right? So makeup is more minimal. I feel like in general, the beauty culture feels more practical. They're going to be dressed and looking physically the part for what they're participating in, you know?
Sure. Rather than like maybe to use the gym example, Germans are going to go to the gym. They'll be dressed in gym clothes looking like it's regular gym, not necessarily like in matching outfit, top and bottom kind of a thing. Although I'm sure there still are people in Germany who do that, but I just feel like it's probably a lot less common than what we expected.
Yeah, I feel like aging was more natural as well, more welcomed. Like wrinkles were just kind of a natural part of life. Not saw in a negative way, though. Again, we were in a unique scenario where we live there, but we're not as strongly influenced by the culture because we didn't grow up in it. So the pressures that Germans might feel growing up in their culture and society, you know, we never had that. So we're just coming in as adults with our formed biases and perspectives. We're kind of in, honestly, an awesome place in my opinion, because we are free of the expectations we had growing up in the States and particularly in Utah, but we're not feeling anything from the German culture other than just trying to be respectful, you know, of our surroundings and other individuals' belief. Yeah, it was nice because we could just kind of ride in between as like free birds is honestly what it felt like.
Yeah. But in many ways, feeling pretty comfortable in the the German approach to the beauty culture, honestly, for what we understood and what we knew. Granted, we lived in Bavaria in a very small community, so there was a lot less pressure because there was a lot less mixing and intermingling with a lot of people from, say, like a city if we were in Berlin or Hamburg or even in Munich, it would have looked differently there.
But I loved it because I remember feeling that relief. Just like feeling that someone like went and turned the volume way down low.
For sure. That's a great analogy. The volume was turned very, very down low in comparison to where we were. And it felt like a breath of fresh air. I could visibly see it in you as well. Like, to be honest, I really enjoyed seeing that part kind of come back to life again. And then also like the relaxation come from it because you can focus on so many other things, right? You're saving so much time. And when time is precious and like such a finite thing, you get a lot of time back to focus on being more present, being more authentic, doing all of the other things that we did while we were there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember feeling like I just hardly spent time on getting ready. Of course, on the occasion when I wanted to, but it was when I wanted to, not because I felt like I had to. Germany is for sure where I think we experienced a slower way of living and a life with less pressure.
Definitely. It is also worth mentioning that with German culture and customs, like there is kind of like an assimilation factor and pressure that comes with maybe like what you wear. You're dressing for the season rather than for like the weather that day. We even had this conversation with coworkers I did today where one of the coworkers who is visiting from Germany, it's not that warm today. Like I was still wearing a jacket, but like you could go outside with a t-shirt. She walked to work today like in a t-shirt and didn't have a jacket with her. And she's like, man, I was getting a lot of looks from the Italians, like wearing their gloves and scarves and stuff like that. And it wasn't that cold. But in Germany, kind of the similar thing, like us as Americans, like the sun comes out in March and April and it's warm enough to be wearing shorts and a t-shirt and we're going to do it. Whereas Germans are maybe more dressed for the season and like waiting until it's officially like spring or summer to wear those clothing, even though it might be like too hot for a jacket, they might still be wearing it, And then of course, not necessarily like wearing the American leisure wear or sweats to certain activities where I think it's also kind of nice. Like in America, there's somewhat of like a I don't care culture, right? They want to be more comfortable.
Or at least to look like you don't care, but they're like curated sweatsuits or matching.
Sure, that's one aspect
stuff.
of it. That's one side, because then there's also definitely the other side where it's like people go to the store in their pajamas
And genuinely don't
care,
for
right?
sure.
Because they're like, well, I have to go and get something. I'm not going to get ready to go and do this. And so like there's this balance.
There's a place for both in my heart.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where I think within Germany, like it's not perfect. We definitely talk highly about it in our experience, but like there is also those pressures. It may not be to the same level, elevated to the same level as far as like getting ready, but like there's certain expectation of like you're going out to the restaurant or you're going to the store or you're going outside on a walk. You're probably not going to see very many Germans in their pajamas and flip-flops going on a walk like you would in the States. Like in our communities growing up, I remember seeing people wearing sweats in the middle of the day on a summer day or whatever. People that really don't care. But in Germany, I don't think I ever saw anyone wearing slip-on sandals that weren't Birkenstocks, like in their pajamas walking down the sidewalk.
Even to just do school pickup. Like I remember being in sweats or comfy clothes, and I never saw a German parent come without, like jeans. Maybe they, had work clothes on too because they're going, but just more put together for some of those things.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to say about Germany, just real quick, is if you listen to our Mormon faith shift episode, that's where we talked about our experience with the Mormon garments. I will always have a very special place in my heart for Germany, regardless of our experience. But I feel like when it came to garments, Germany was the place that allowed me to feel comfortable to wear what I wanted. There was such low pressures for perfection and beauty standards. It was just nice to have that environment where I was going through like a deeply emotional time with that,
Yeah, I think it was a good place for it to happen and a soft landing into a new territory.
So moving on to Japan. Japan's beauty culture feels a little complex to me because on one hand, you have a culture that highly, highly emphasizes skincare. And then on the other hand, you have a society that also emphasizes conformity of fitting in and blending in. And so for me as an American, I feel like a lot of the beauty culture pressures I felt were more about standing out and like looking the best. It's been interesting to reflect on Japan because I think there is potentially equal amount of pressures, but they have totally different flavors and factors about them.
Yeah, for example, like with job applications or with universities, there's like a certain attire and a certain look that's kind of expected. People do, at least according to us, look very similar in like the way that they dress. But it's also, I think, just like culturally part of Japan's conformity and uniformity and trying to be humble within their like profession. I think also translates to like what they wear and like how they appear versus being like a flashy, bold, I'm standing out kind of a thing. I think the humility aspect does drive a lot of beauty culture in Japan. Wouldn't you say?
I can see that. I always felt like Japanese men were like dressed to a T, like in their work attire. I feel like they were always very well groomed and yes, just very put together. So I do feel like Japan's beauty culture just feels like very precise, yet also kind of subtle. And I think it's just more about like the polish and the neatness rather than like the Instagram beauty ideal. And I'm sure as I say that, there's a whole beauty culture on Japan's like Instagram, but it's going to look different. In terms of makeup in Japan, I feel like it was a little more soft, but you could tell super curated. And one thing I remembered when we first moved to Japan was going into the bathrooms and seeing specific sections separate from like the hand washing sinks and the mirrors that were strictly there to like do your makeup and like freshen up before going out. Did you have that in the male bathrooms?
No.
Really?
There might have been one now that you say that, but the majority of bathrooms now did not have this little like mid-section where you could do makeup and stuff.
Okay, yeah, we've never had this conversation before. Definitely major differences there because even off of like the freeway, the highway in Japan, this is where there were some of the best stations. I remember a place having like 10 to 15 mirrors with like standing up length mirrors.
Like booths?
No, they're not that sectioned off and like private, but it would be like kind of tiered. So they're not like all even against the wall. So they're a little bit sectioned off, but not with like a wall separating. And they have like a standing shelf where you can put your bags on it and your combs or whatever. The women would use them. I especially remember going to Disney World, and that's where like all the women were, is they're reapplying their lipstick.
Wow.
I remember lipstick being something that was really applied and combing their bangs. Italy, I don't see that. In Germany, I didn't. And even in the States, like, sure, maybe you'd see a section for that on occasion, but to the same amount and frequency in bathrooms, Japan by far is unique in that.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting to hear. And I would say that like Japan overall, just because of its uniqueness to more of like the westernized culture, has some maybe of those cultural differences and the knacks that are, I guess, what we would consider to be maybe over planned and over designed. But I mean, they are practical, right? I mean, for people to be able to have a station to like reapply or to apply if they need to.
Yeah, and we won't go too in depth with this, but of course we mentioned skincare because it's heavily emphasized in Japan. In fact, a lot of people travel to Japan with empty suitcases on purpose to just leave home with beauty supplies. So Japan's known for having some of the best skincare. There is a strong emphasis on like skin protection from the sun. I am not exactly sure about the culture in terms of anti-aging. I would say based on the messaging and what I inferred from it, it's also highly emphasized to have youthful, wrinkle-free looking skin. But, I wasn't Google translating everything to see. I just kind of assumed that.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there was more emphasis on just taking care of your skin, maybe more so than just doing it for the aesthetics only.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so last country now, Italy. Why don't you give your kind of broad observation so far?
Yeah, so for here in Italy, there's definitely more makeup use and more getting ready than what we experienced in Germany. So comparing like the European market, and the styles are just vastly different than Japan, but it's not quite as expressive as Utah, and doesn't seem like there's as much of the hyper focus as it was in Utah.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I feel like what comes to my mind when I think of Italy is that it is all about expression. And I feel like Italy feels like there's quite a contrast with it. So, for example, we can go to an Italian supermarket and see women wearing like high-heeled boots and like looking really put together in the grocery store. Or another example is like going into downtown Vicenza and seeing like furry coats and like fashionable hats. And again, like high-heeled boots. I feel like I see high-heeled boots a lot. And they typically have like more makeup on. And in my opinion, their look is like a fancier look, like a night out in the town. But in general, it could be like midday and they're just walking around kind of doing their normal thing. But it feels more effortless. So maybe that's what you're meaning in terms of Utah. Like maybe it doesn't feel as like forced or that it's happening to like fit the aesthetic per se.
I just feel like it feels less trendy. And maybe that's because I'm just still getting caught up to like what is trendy and what's so Italian. There's so many other aspects of life here that I'm focusing on. But we do notice like boots, stilettos and boots and other things like that are more common than either Germany and Japan than what we experienced. Funny enough, older women in their hairstyles. Mm-hmm. Purple and green and ivory white and all these like different colors of hair that people will dye their hairs with. Definitely more than Japan.
And maybe that's where some of the thoughts of like Italy being so expressive comes from, is because I feel like Italians are doing it in an artistic way. You know, it's these very effortlessly stylish Italian women that are just kind of dressed to the par, but I feel like those are just like the creative individuals that they are. Yeah. Whereas those that I'm envisioning in my head in Utah might also be creative and artistic, but also I just feel like there's a lot of homogenous styles, you know, like a lot of people are wearing the same things. Like the trends are very clear to see in Utah. And so I feel like here there's, yes, also like the same things, like the furry coats, the high heel boots, but it extends beyond that.
Yeah, feels less trendy.
And it surpasses some of the ages.
You know, the natural aging approach from what it seems like. Lots of older men and women, specifically women if we're talking about it, where they do have quite a bit of wrinkles. They have quite a bit of saggy skin. Like the embracing of their age and just like what their body goes through seems to be fairly normal and like commonly just accepted. Like that's part of aging. It's part of life.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that aspect about life in Europe. The other part I was going to say, you know, talking about Italian's beauty culture and how it feels a little complex is because we do see like these very effortlessly Italian stylish women, but then we go to school drop off. And I feel like in both the mornings and the evenings, most of the people we're seeing are just wearing jeans and t-shirt, looking very casual. Many of the women we interact with are wearing minimal to no makeup. So it is nice to see that contrast. And it is nice to feel like there's a place for both here in Italy.
Absolutely. I think our experience with each of the countries that we've lived in and moved to has just like opened up our eyes to, I guess, like the different perspectives that people are used to seeing for beauty and like appearance. Although there's definitely still a focus, like every country still has shown like they value the importance of showing up and looking good and taking care of yourself. There has been like less of a focus on it.
It's kind of funny, and I think a good example of beauty culture in Italy, I like to do Willa's hair. It's not always, like literally probably 80 to 90% of the time, she's going to school with just her hair combed. Like our family has the genetics of straight hair. Her hair is considered done in my eyes if it's brushed. However, I always dreamed about being able to do my girl's hair. Like that was something that I love to do, and I treasure those moments with Willa. And so when we do her hair, the Italian moms comment on it and compliment, like without fail every time.
When I went to the birthday party a couple weeks ago and was sitting with the adults, one of the parents had, you know, made a comment about Willa's hairstyle. They like said, "Oh, like your wife does a really good job." And I said, "Yeah, like she does. She enjoys doing the hair." And she's like, "No, seriously, like it's like very professional, like done." And I know it doesn't go unnoticed, and I know that the comments are made there, and even based off of like the words, where Italians tend to like address our girls by like "ciao bella," you know, which, you know, is adorable and very Italian and very common
Yeah.
Like even just to say, not necessarily like focusing on the
Physical
physical
appearance.
appearance, but more of like just in general, like an endearing salutation, right? A way of saying hello. But yeah, there's definitely been comments where they're like, oh, like, sei bellissima, like when they're telling like a girl, is like, oh, you're so beautiful. Nothing wrong with saying those things, but time will tell how that progresses as they continue to get older. And if like the focus is strictly to the endearment and that approach, or if it's like truly shifted and focused on the physical appearance.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to laugh about like the comments that they made about me doing Willa's hair, because I feel like if Willa was to attend school in Utah, I would probably fit into the category of like the parents that's not really doing their kids' hair that much and is like definitely not standing out on hairstyles. Like I'd probably be the less hands-on parent.
I think Willa would be asking for more hairstyles based off of just what her peers would likely be showing up to school with.
Yeah, like that's probably in part why I am good at it, is because growing up, I always wanted to do my hairstyles. So kind of closing out the episode with our story of doing Willa's hair, it's all up to where you live. It's all up to the beauty standards of that location and even up to interpretation. And I think that just shows how much weight and power goes into where you are and where you're living. I think that's what we kind of close with, is that when you compare places, you realize that beauty standards are not fixed. They change place to place. And like we mentioned, they even change continuously in that place. And for me personally, it's been freeing to come to that realization, because I realized like the beauty culture that I grew up in Utah, in the USA, is not actually like a solid truth, you know? It's an ideal for that area and a standard that some people idolize, but in another place, it would not be the beauty ideal standard.
And in many places that we've been to, people look at it and they say it seems exhausting. It seems way too high pressure. And in so many ways it is. And I think even those who participate in it, like they probably do wish in some ways that it could like mellow out so that they could feel like they wouldn't have to continuously strive and try to meet that standard, right? And of course, on the other side, people who just really enjoy it and they just fully dive in and they love to be the expressive type of person with makeup and hairstyles and everything. And there's definitely a balance for both. But this has been our perspective overall of us looking at beauty culture has changed after leaving the US and now living in several different countries that have a different approach to beauty standards.
Yeah, well said. Really, in the end, we don't want to live beauty-free lives. That's not actually what we're trying to get across. We also don't want to reject like femininity or even masculinity. We just ultimately want space to choose. We want to be able to participate consciously, knowing why the pressure to participate is even there in the first place, being able to opt out if we want to, or opt in if it's something that we value, you know? It's just like that choice. And I think that's really the key, is being able to know that our value does not fluctuate with the current trends. And we don't only hope that for ourselves or our girls. Of course, we hope that for anyone listening in.
Yeah, well said. Thanks for joining us in this episode. We really hope you've enjoyed it. And please fill out any comments and let us know any of your thoughts about this and how it applies to where you live or where you grew up. With that, we hope you'll join us on our next upcoming videos. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and give us a rating on Apple or Spotify podcasts.
See you on the next video. Ciao, ciao.